D-O-U-G, like Douglas MacArthur. Douglas.
D-O-U-G-L-A-S.
Right.
G-A-D-D-Y.
Correct.
And it listed you as an attorney. No, as an author.
No, attorney and author. Or,
Yeah, attorney. Well, hello, my name is Ray Hill. The name of the show is Public Affairs, Public Access. We kind of call it PAPA around here. It is Houston Media Sources' effort to bring you information not available anywhere else, which is kind of our calling in the media world. We're going to bring you tonight an old guest, someone we've had on before, Douglas Caddy, and Douglas is licensed to practice law in Texas and in British Columbia, or the District of Columbia, I'm sorry. And he is also an author of 7 books. Douglas, the last time you were here, we talked about some aspects of the Kennedy assassination that others didn't know. And could you give us an update on that story?
yes, we talked about the dinner that I had with Howard Hunt just prior to his entering prison in 1975. And as you remember, Howard Hunt was a key figure in the Kennedy assassination, as he disclosed on his deathbed. And as a result of the program that we had here, I had I was contacted by several individuals who wanted more information, and I thought I'd just take this opportunity very briefly to bring this up to date. And just to review, Watergate occurred in June of 1972, and Howard Hunt came to my apartment in Washington, D.C., and retained me within 2 hours after the break-in to represent him and the arrested arrested burglars in that case. He and Gordon Liddy had escaped. And then it was very complicated legal proceedings after that, but even though I was his attorney, and I was pulled before the grand jury, and so I had to cease contact with him. The next time I saw him was at the funeral of his wife, who, in December of 1972, who had died in a mysterious plane crash in Chicago. And the third time was in 1975, when he was about to go into prison to serve his 3.5 years for the Watergate crimes. And he called me up and said, let's have dinner. I want to express my appreciation. We had no contact for 3 years. Mm-hmm. And so at that dinner, I'm not going to, because we talked about it previously, and that interview, our program is on YouTube and can be played. I'll just briefly mention that we discussed, I asked him why, because I never really knew why the burglars went into the Democratic National Committee at Watergate. Why did they actually go in there? And he was very reluctant to discuss that, but he did mention that one reason they did go in there was the belief that there was information in there on the Kennedy assassination, within the Democratic National Committee. And
to be used against them in the campaign, perhaps.
Yes, and the great fear that this might, went back to something that Richard Nixon had done in 1960, in setting up a task force to kill Castro. But Nixon was not elected president, and this task force continued on, and it involved Cubans and so forth. And so the great fear was that there was information inside the Democratic National Committee that could tie Nixon, who was running for re-election in 1972, back to what had occurred in 1960. And so I asked Howard for more information, and he just went like this and cut off further discussion. He didn't want to pursue it, other than mentioning that aspect. And so the dinner was over, and we were on the sidewalk, and I knew this would probably be the last time I would see Howard, maybe forever or for many years.
Right.
Because he was going to prison, and I was thinking about moving from Washington to Houston. And so I said to myself, well, I'm going to ask Howard a final question here. Why was Kennedy assassinated? And he said, Kennedy was assassinated because he was about to give our most vital secret secret, singular, to the Soviet Union. And I was shocked, I was surprised. I said, what was that? He said, the alien presence. And with that, he looked in my eyes and shook my hand and walked away. The alien presence, okay.
Huh. And he wasn't talking about immigrants.
No, he was talking about the alien presence, which in my pursuit of the subject since then has led me to believe has been on Earth for many, many years, for tens of thousands of years.
And governments know this and we don't.
Okay. But, okay, and one of the reasons why he was assassinated, well, the principal reason he was assassinated was going to give our most vital secret to the Soviet Union, the alien presence. And what was going on in the Kennedy administration that he was building bridges, as you remember, with
Sure.
Khrushchev. He had all these—
Trying to.
And they wanted to explore outer space together, and this disturbed the deep state, you might say, the Defense Department and so forth, these overtures that he was having with the Soviet Union. But also going on in his administration from 1961 to 1963, within the Pentagon, Colonel Philip Corso was distributing objects that had been recovered from UFOs that had been crashed, or objects that had been given to us by the alien presence, to corporations. For example, out of this came lasers and fiber optics and integrated circuits and so forth. And that was the period there was a big breakthrough in technology in the United States.
Now, I remember a flashback about that era, some captured Russian aircraft, where we were doing solid state and mostly electronic stuff. They still had vacuum tubes
Right.
in their radios.
Yes.
Which meant the Soviet Union was way behind us. And that technology wasn't reliable. I know how unreliable vacuum tubes are because I've been in radio since vacuum tubes were used.
Right. Well, Colonel Philip Corso in the 1990s wrote a book, The Day After Roswell. That is his book in which he recounts all this, his work in the Pentagon and his assignments and so forth. And so the great fear on the part of the Pentagon and the CIA and those who decided that Kennedy must be killed was that he was given these same things that would be given to the corporations. He was going to give, he could give to the Soviet Union, and he had to be stopped. Okay, so
well, that's certainly an interesting twist. I would encourage the viewers of this program to go to YouTube, and you can search Ray Hill Doug Caddy. Several shows will pop up. That's RayHill DouglasCaddy, and that references those programs are previously shot here at Houston Media Source, and they are on YouTube now.
And I was also encourage the viewers to get hold of Colonel Corso's book, The Day After Roswell, in which he lays out all this information. But the important thing here is that was occurring in the Kennedy administration, that crucial period of the distribution of this, of these secret things, you might say, to the corporations, which improved upon them, and result. That's what we see today. Everybody has a smartphone, an iPhone, and so forth. That's all the result of what happened way back in the 1960s. So I just wanted to bring that up to date, because there have been some questions been asked to me about that.
Well, you brought up the deep state in this conversation, and that brings us to what influences from the deep state and elsewhere might have played in the 2016 presidential election. And that's our next topic. Where do we start?
Yes, I wrote a letter to FBI Director Comey on December 10th of 2016, in which I provided information for him to investigate in regard to the rigging of the presidential election. And he was subsequently fired by President Trump. And so I followed up with a letter to Robert Mueller, the special counsel, giving them additional information. And the subject of my letters is as follows, okay? And this, by the way, is available online at the Education Forum, by the way, whereby I have to go back and give a little bit of history here. I worked with William F. Buckley in founding the modern conservative movement. I did this in the 1950s. And as a result of a rally that we had at the Manhattan Center in 1960, the modern conservative movement was created. And before then, it didn't exist. And there were a number of people that graduated, or you might say alumni of that conservative movement. And among them was Roger Stone. Roger Stone and also Paul Manafort. Roger Stone was the first campaign manager for Trump in the 2016 presidential campaign, and he was succeeded by Paul Manafort. They were close friends going back to high school. And so I knew both of these individuals going back to the 1970s. And what happened was in January of 2016, over a year ago, I was contacted by a key person in the LaRouche organization, Harley Schlanger, who at that time was here in Houston. He had actually lived here in Houston for many years. He's now living in Europe, still on behalf of the LaRouche organization. But he asked for me to set up a meeting for him to meet Roger Stone. He did not tell me the purpose of it, but he did in a sense. He said Roger Stone would play a key role in the Trump campaign, and I would like to meet him.
Okay.
And so I set up that meeting, and it was held in February of 2016 in Austin. I was suffering from allergies, so I could not attend. I was supposed to be there.
You must have gone over during the cedar season.
Yeah, right. And so the two of them met, and my impression afterwards, they had a tremendous, they both said it was a very successful meeting. And my impression afterwards was that there was an agreement to open up a back channel, the LaRouche organization, which has wonderful, you might say wonderful or concrete, from their viewpoint, wonderful contacts in the Soviet Union. No, into Russia. Actually in the Soviet Union in old days and Russia today. They go back for a long time, okay. And so out of that, Roger Stone started appearing on the radio programs that Roger Stone had in Florida, and he later appeared on. He later invited Lyndon LaRouche himself to be on his radio program. But an interesting aspect which I uncovered later on was that, as you know, in December of 2015, that was a month before before Harley Schlanger contacted me, there was a dinner in Moscow to celebrate the anniversary. I think it was the 10th anniversary of the Russia Today program. That's a dinner at which General Flynn was seated right next to
famous dinner.
Yeah, to Putin, okay. But the LaRouche organization had a delegation there, and there is a dossier that was compiled. It's called the famous British dossier by Mr. Steele. I think it's about 35 pages or so, in which he compiled on Mr. Trump. On pages 15 and 16, he talks about the LaRouche organization having a delegation at this dinner. And that showed how close they were, the LaRouche organization was to...
Well, going back to the Nixon years,
yeah,
and Watergate, the Nixon campaign, his first campaign for presidency, was full of dirty tricks, dirty political tricks being played. I mean, they've made, other than All of the President's Men, they've made other movies about the dirty tricks of the Nixon. Has that been a spiral where taking over what we think is normal, register the votes and go to the polls and vote, has that completely been eroded by a theory of dirty trick politics?
Well, we've graduated beyond all that now, and it matured in the Trump campaign. And getting back to Roger Stone, he was a key person in rigging the election in Florida in the year 2000, that the Supreme Court, by a vote of 5-4,
Well, you and I wrote about that.
elected George W. Bush president. And Sandra Day O'Connor, who was on the court at that time, has since expressed regret that the court got involved in this. She realized it made a grave mistake. And as we know, out of that came 9/11, and out of that came the war on Iran, weapons of mass destruction, which was non-existent, and we're still fighting terrorism today. So it was a terrible thing that occurred. And that was in the year 2000. In 2004, Roger Stone was very active in rigging the Ohio results in Ohio that got George W. Bush reelected president. And now he appears again in the year 2016 to help Mr. Trump. And he's very forthright about it. He talks about, he made that statement, he tweeted, "Don't forget, she is done," talking about Hillary about a month before the election, because of all the things that had been done to make sure that the election would be rigged. And it's just coming out now, the role of the Russians and they must have help in the United States in this. There's no way they could change the voter registration rules, which it now appears it was done, and the results of elections in certain districts, and where they got onto Facebook and set up tens of thousands of fake accounts, and had advertising and events and so forth, and it's still unraveling all the activities that Russia did during the 2016 election, which Special Counsel Mueller is investigating. And so there's no way that Russia could have figured out exactly how to do this in the United States unless they had help from someone within the United States.
Do you really think that's necessary? I mean, I've been involved in the electoral process right here in Harris County. I've been a precinct judge.
Right.
I know how votes are gathered, how they're counted. And back when you were dealing with tangible pieces of paper doing that, it would be difficult to alter the voter turnout in a given precinct. But since all of this is electronic, and even more important, all of this does not produce a paper trail that you can look at and say this person voted this way and that person. All of that has been turned into electronic mumbo jumbo. And it's relatively easy if you can get into the system to change a given precinct. So weird things happen now.
Mm-hmm.
We have counties in Texas where you look at how many people voted, and then how many people voted for Democratic candidates, and how many people voted for Republican candidates. And in some counties, more people vote for the Republican candidates than voted at all in those precincts. And because it's all electronically done, there's no way you can go back in and verify. With the old voter registration books, you never knew how people voted, but you always knew for sure how many people voted. And that's all gone now.
That's all gone. And I have very little faith in the integrity of our voting system today. Actually, it just takes influence in a national election, as shown in the 2016 election. It just takes three states, rigging the election in 3 states. Which is what was done to affect the outcome.
In a handful of precincts.
Yeah, and a handful of precincts. It doesn't take rigging it nationwide in every state at all. You just have to pick a very few states that tip the election.
Yeah, because your computer can tell you what's strategic.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And what's not strategic. Mm-hmm. And then you go there and fix there, and you upset the whole apple cart.
Right. And I predict, as a result of Special Counsel Mueller's investigation, he will show that we have an illegitimate president sitting in the White House at the present time, one that was not validly elected.
Well, constitutionally, what can you do about it?
It's going to create a lot of chaos out of this. And it's hard to predict how it's going to go.
Well, if the president is a fake president, unconstitutionally elected, does that not affect the election of the vice president since their names were side by side on the same ballots?
And does it not affect the election of members of Congress too, that were up for vote at the same time? The whole ball of wax is up for
And what happens? What happens to people appointed to the Supreme Court
Exactly.
by a president that did not have portfolio to be there?
And right now, that president is trying to appoint judges to the Court of Appeals around the country, and so it raises what I think may happen. Okay, I'm drawing upon my experience in Watergate. Okay.
Okay. Well, now Watergate pretty much upset the apple cart.
Yeah, yeah, it did, but there's so many parallels between what's happening now and what happened in Watergate, and what I foresee possibly happening is that that Trump may yet be indicted, even as a sitting president. Though there's a question whether there's a legitimate question of whether that can be done, but let the courts straighten that out, and that Vice President Pence will be named an unindicted co-conspirator, and because of his activities. And the Attorney General Sessions figures so prominently in this. He lied under oath about denying contact with the Russians.
Securing his appointment.
Yeah, and it goes on down. So ultimately, it looks like it may end up with the Supreme Court going back to the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court.
How it is constituted when this gets there. Because Gorsuch is without portfolio.
Right.
If Trump was illegitimately placed in office.
Sure. His nomination and confirmation would be subject to a challenge. Exactly.
And there's all kinds of shady business going on with McConnell and Ryan. They're finding some interesting campaign contributions to them. We don't know much about the campaign contributions to Bernie because it was all in such small amounts that it didn't have to be reported. And I thought, boy, what an opportunity for somebody who wants to mess up the pudding.
Exactly. Is
you have all these tens of thousands, millions of dollars coming in little bitty pieces that you don't have to keep records on. And you gave me just before the show the business about Giuliani and his friends from the FBI and from the New York Police Department. I did notice that Giuliani played a very important role during the campaign, and he didn't wind up with anything in rewards. What happened there?
Well, I think what happened there was that he played such a dirty role, maybe a legal role in the campaign, that any nomination that would for him, he wanted to be Secretary of State, but any nomination for whatever office he wanted would be subject to hearings by the U.S. Senate, and it would open a can of worms for him and for Trump. So so the decision was made that he would not be rewarded with a post. But there was this article. This is from the Huffington Post. Okay.
Yeah.
And the title of it is, was Rudy Giuliani at the center of an FBI Trump campaign conspiracy to steal the election? And he was. And I think you have that same article.
I've got the same article here.
Yeah.
And the part that you brought to my attention is the rank and file FBI agents cooperated with Giuliani in this matter in the field office at New York. Of course, Giuliani had been previously the U.S. attorney in that office, so we knew a lot of those folks. And they illegally released confidential material in such a way that it affected the outcoming of the case. And they were partially responsible for reopening the case, which got Comey into trouble even before the election, and gave Trump the mistaken idea that if he fired Comey, Democrats would support that because of Comey's last-minute thing. And now that Hillary's book is out, we can read what she thought about Comey, but this is a bona fide mess.
Well, there's a question. Remember, the reason Comey reopened at the last minute, you might say, just before the election, and the investigation into Hillary was the allegation that there were emails, confidential, secret emails, government emails, found on her home computer used by her husband, Anthony Weiner.
Yeah, you're talking about
Huma
Hillary's assistant.
Huma Abedin,
Yeah.
who was married to Weiner, okay? And there's a real question of how those appeared on that, how they were placed on that computer, how they appeared. Did she place them there, or did she send them there, or did someone place them there? And we have to go back to ancient history. We have to go back to what the FBI did to Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
And they wrote all sorts of letters and manufactured all sorts of things to destroy that man. And you have to go back to the Weather Underground, where Mark Felt, who at one time wanted to be the FBI director, he was named Deep Throat, in Watergate. He devised a plan to kidnap the baby of a sister of a Weather Underground leader. She was not involved in it at all, but they were going to. He wanted to kidnap her baby as a hostage to make this fellow come and surrender. Okay, and so the FBI is not. It's a quasi law enforcement agency, but it has been involved, and there have been many books written about this, in a number of very questionable things. And I myself have an affidavit from a confidential informant from the FBI about 2 FBI agents who literally contacted him, and they wanted to kill me in the midst of Watergate. They wanted to eliminate me. That's a sworn affidavit from a confidential informant, and it's actually published in a book. And so the FBI it does wonderful things, but also you have to question what's it now. Let's go back to the Trump campaign for a moment. Here's another article. Former FBI Assistant Director, something big is about to happen in the Clinton case. That's this headline from this article. And they're talking about...
when was the article?
Beg your pardon?
Was the article just before the Weiner wife?
It's at the end of October, just before the election. And this is about James Colstron, the former FBI Assistant Director. And to quote from them, he also says that he suspects internal disagreements within the FBI forced Director Comey to act suddenly in the final weeks before the election. Quote, I think he couldn't hold on to it any longer, Colstrom said, because who knows, maybe the locals would have stepped in on this. By locals, Colstrom was referring to the New York branch of the FBI, which is capable of acting independently. So you have rogue agents within the FBI who are rigging the election against Hillary, rigging the election in favor of Trump. And you also had the Russians doing it at the same time. You have to wonder whether there was not some coordination. I hate to say that, but you have to wonder if there was not some coordination going on there. And what bothers me, to be honest, is that there's no, I love Rachel Maddow. I watch her every night she's on. She does a marvelous job.
We got Hillary on tonight.
Tonight, okay. I'm gonna watch that when I get home, okay. But MSNBC has yet to touch the question of the role of Giuliani and Colstrom, the former FBI.
No, I don't hear anything about Giuliani.
Yeah.
In the current discussions. Mueller, of course, Mueller is playing all of his cards close to his chest.
Right.
Doug, is it even possible that Comey and Mueller, his predecessor as head of the FBI, doesn't know all about this skunt work stuff? Is it possible that they don't know?
Oh, they know. Oh, no. Comey was played by these people. He was played by these people.
Is that why he got through those emails in Weiner's wife's computer so quickly? He realized he was being played, and he said, there ain't nothing here, but it was too late to have an effect on the people going to the polls. And
I agree with Hillary that what he did, it was because he was played by Giuliani and Colstrom, Kallstrom, James Colstrom, the former FBI Assistant Director, and by the NYPD Intelligence Division.
So the ghost of J. Edgar Hoover lives in the Justice Department office building to this day.
To this day, to this day. And so Comey is well aware. The question is whether they want to, both of them being Comey and being Mueller being former directors of the FBI, whether they want to open up the question of this question about the role of the FBI in rigging the election against Hillary. That's the issue. Do they want to open this up? And so one reason I want to bring this up at this program at this time is that you and I think we both want to raise this as a legitimate issue that should be discussed publicly.
Sure.
In the investigation that's going on.
Well, let me tell the folks that my name is Ray Hill, and my guest today is Douglas Caddy. Douglas is an attorney who is licensed to practice law in D.C. and District of Columbia and in Houston. He has done both. He is also the author of a good many books, and we're discussing here the skunk works that affect elections. As a matter of fact, we started out talking about elections long ago because Doug's claim to fame was that he was the attorney hired to represent the Watergate burglars and other principals in the Watergate soon after the break-in was disclosed and the arrests were made. He didn't work there long because he ran into some ethical problems because they were asking him to do things which he could not do without jeopardizing his ability professionally to practice law. And Doug put up his hands and walked away from it. That gives him some degree of credibility with me because I've had to walk out of situations where ethically I had to make a choice if I had remained, and so I just didn't stay. So I understand that. Doug has been doing this research for a good deal of time, and Doug's an old friend of mine. Way back in 2002, we wrote a performance piece quoting from people in the media about how the 2000 election was stolen in Florida, and we proceeded to write how it was going to be stolen in Ohio in the 2004 election. All of that proved to be true. Too bad we didn't get credit for knowing it ahead of everybody else, but Doug and I have been working on these issues for a long time. That brings us to 2016. Here in Houston, my organization, Houston Gay and Lesbian Political Caucus, had the most successful political year in its history. All politics are inherently local, we thought. And now we're beginning to see how election results have been manipulated in a handful of precincts and a handful of states, so that somebody who did not win a majority of the appropriate votes to get a majority of the electoral votes is sitting in the White House. And he certainly didn't win a majority of the popular votes. So he said, I didn't win the majority, so that meant that 4 million people voted illegally. What are the chances? You, as an observer of this show and as a citizen of this nation, have got to decide whether any of this is important to you, because let me tell you, you start talking about the unreliability of elections and the first effect is people will not vote. That's the wrong response, Doug. You're going to have to keep on voting, and voting like it was going to actually be counted. And in Harris County, we watch our county judge very carefully. As a matter of fact, we threaten him to make sure he does it right. We're watching. At one point, I sued him. But the deal is, we have to protect the integrity of our local votes and hope other people around the country do too. We can get out of this mess, but it is not going to be a neat escape, is it, Doug?
No, and what we face is that Trump has appointed this commission to study voting in the United States. And from day one, it's been operating now for about 2 months. There's been scandal after scandal about how biased it is and how it's rigging its results and so forth. And rather than secure the integrity of the voting process, it appears it's trying to rig set up the rigging of the next
Future election.
congressional election next year in 2018 and the presidential election in 2020. And so we're faced with what Roger Stone, who's not involved in this aspect because he has too many legal problems at the present time to be involved in anything like that. But it's people that of the same stripe that know how they do not believe in honest elections. They do not believe that the American voters can be trusted, and so their purpose is to rig elections, and they'll do anything to do so. And so we're faced with that very problem right now with that commission that's been appointed by Trump that's holding hearings and so forth. It's an outrage about what they're doing.
Well, and politics to a large degree, Doug, has become a cult of personality. I mean, Trump said, my supporters would eat crap sandwiches if I told them to. And that's likely true because I'm reading what they say on their blogs. And Trump can do no wrong. And they support him through thick and thin. Even with this new stuff of his apparently compromising on DACA after screaming that DACA is the evil of the world, compromising.
Those are the children.
The children, the people, the children of who were born and came as children
to the United States.
The dreamers.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And the DACA thing, Trump is crawfishing on, and they're making excuses. Instead of saying he's betrayed them, they're making excuses for him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, by the way, every once in a while a phone number appears across the bottom of the screen. If you want to call in and have a question for me and or Doug, probably Doug, he's the one that knows what he's talking about. I'm not always too sure. I'm just playing along. Give us a call and we'll put you on the air audially and let you ask Doug a question. But you're listening to Ray Hill on Public Affairs, Public Access. The guest is Douglas Caddy.
I may be too cynical, but what I read into Trump's recent reaching out to Pelosi and to Schumer, the leaders of the Democratic Party, is that he fears he may be impeached. And so he's trying to build bridges that say maybe if I'm up there for impeachment and a vote by the Senate, maybe, just maybe, that by building bridges to these people at this time, maybe they'll look on me a little bit more favorably and maybe I won't be impeached. But these are practicing politicians and statespeople, and they're not going to be persuaded by this. But
well, he cuts a deal with them, and in a few hours insists that it wasn't a deal, it was a discussion, and he's crawfishing on this. He's got to serve two masters. He's got to serve his base,
mm-hmm.
and he's got to serve television lens,
Mm-hmm.
which is on him all the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And he can't escape the glare of that lens.
Mm-hmm.
And I have never seen anybody in public office that so obviously lies as often as Donald Trump. Now, I know a lot of politicians, and I know they can stretch the truth here and stretch falsehood there and come pretty close, but I've never known anybody that just shamelessly lies.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, I think everybody recognizes that he has a problem with that.
He is conflicted with the truth.
Mm-hmm. Conflicted with the truth, yes. I wanted to mention two other things before we leave the subject of Roger Stone and the LaRouche organization this.
I don't have a good picture of LaRouche. LaRouche has been around for a long time.
Yeah.
His organization, he claims to be a part of the Democratic Party,
Mm-hmm.
like Trump claims to be a part of the Republican Party, and that has always seemed like a sham to me. LaRouchers have actually been elected Democratic Party chair here in Harris County at various times. And the whole party just had to wire around them while they were there because they didn't have any of the principles of the party in mind. Now, are you saying they've been closely associated with first the Soviet Union and now Russia through all of that?
Oh yes, they've had a relationship with the Soviet Union and with Russia for a long time. This is an article. I'm going to hold it up from the Houston Chronicle of November 7th, 1982.
Yeah.
The man who perfected Marx. LaRouche collects money, works at making folks over in his image. He wants to make folks over in his image. Now, where have we heard that before?
Oh, yeah. Jesus.
My goodness. But anyway, in this article, this is one little paragraph. I'm just going to quote here. It says that according to his autobiography published in 1979, The Power of Reason, LaRouche was born in a Quaker family in New Hampshire in 1922 and had only 2 friends until late in high school. He says the reasons that he lacked friends was that his mental capabilities were superior to everyone else in high school. And so he was by himself most of the time. As a very young man, he joined the socialist group where he, quote, perfected the theories of Marx. That's what he claims. He perfected the theories of Marx. This is Lyndon LaRouche.
Yeah.
Now, I will say that that I agree with a number of the proposals put out by the LaRouche people on financial matters and on monetary matters. In other words, they're not entirely far out, in my opinion. They certainly are on Russia and on the rigging of the election.
Well, Marx's theory of distribution of wealth reads very good.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, what it results in is extreme dictatorships, and now Russia, the former icon of Marxism, is virtually an oligarchy. A handful of people own the whole thing. There's no common ownership of any of the means of production or distribution.
Well, in a sense, I think that the way we handled when communism fell in the Soviet Union in 1991.
Yeah.
I know this from a friend of mine who talked to the American ambassador to the Soviet Union in Moscow subsequently. The American capitalists went into the Soviet Union to loot it. To loot it. They went in there to steal all the minerals, anything they get their hands on, okay? And that's why Putin rose up out of nowhere to challenge that and took control and wrested control back to his people. Because just like Trump and his cronies in his cabinet right now are looting the United States, and let me mention this, they're going to take what happened with Hurricane Harvey and Irma, right? Irma? Yeah.
Right.
And they're going to get the billions of dollars that are appropriated. Much of the money is going to disappear, I can tell you right now. That's why victims of Sandy, which was 7 years ago, are still waiting to get their money that they are owed, the victims of Sandy. And there's an article in the paper today about how Trump had nominated the number 2 guy for Homeland Security, for FEMA,
Yeah.
and he had to withdraw his nomination because it was disclosed in Katrina. He let a contract for $1 billion go to one company. $1 billion. Let me ask you this: was that $1 billion ever audited? I question whether it was ever audited.
Well, I mean, the whole idea of the war on Iraq, that went to a local company. That went to Halliburton, and they've now moved to Kuwait, where it's cooler.
Right. Yeah. So we're faced with what happened in the Soviet Union in 1991 when the American capitalists went in there to loot it is what's happening in our country now with this administration. They know exactly how to go about looting America, and that's what they're going to do. And they'll enrich themselves and their friends tremendously. There'll be a whole number of people who become billionaires out of this thing. And we'll never know the accounting. We'll never have an accounting where the money went. We'll never have an accounting for that. So that's in my opinion, that's a major problem. But I hate to bring up one other thing I want to mention here in regard to Roger Stone. Roger Stone did write a book which I recommend. Okay, this is his book, "The Man Who Killed Kennedy: The Case Against LBJ," And he did contact me in preparation for writing his book. And I gave him my files because I had represented Billy Saul Estes in 1984 when Billy Saul Estes wanted to get immunity from the Justice Department to disclose what he knew about his relationship with LBJ. He was LBJ's silent business partner and so forth.
Yep.
And so I will say this about Roger Stone, and I will say he wrote a wonderful book, and I recommend it highly. I did want that on the record that he has done some good things too, in addition to some bad things. Okay.
Well, I think all of us, even you and I, are mixed bags. We try to do what's right. Sometimes that works, and sometimes it doesn't.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we go out on a limb on some of these positions, and then we've got to ride that branch wherever it goes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But while we're on Harvey, Houston suffered more devastation during Hurricane Harvey than it has in its history. We've had bad hurricanes before. I remember Carla. I'm getting old. And I remember Carla in 1961. I made money off of Carla.
That was 1961?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Carla swept in from the Gulf of Mexico with a lot of wind and a lot of water, flooded everything between Pasadena and the Gulf Coast, and actually the beach. As a result, I was in the microfilm business, and there was a lot of schematics and architectural plans that were deteriorating rapidly that had to be preserved, and the only way to do that was with microfilm. So in the course of about 3 months after Carla, I made $70,000, which in 1961 was a hell of a lot of money.
Yeah, sure was. Absolutely.
A great deal of money. I bought a new car.
Mm-hmm.
And decided that I wasn't going to make that money ever again, and quit, and went to do something else, became a college bum.
Mm-hmm.
But Carla, her hurricanes come regularly, but this is the worst we've ever had.
Do you attribute climate change to perhaps what's happening now?
Well, I can't I'm not the scientist, but I believe that climate change are making larger storms more frequent. I believe that. That is a belief, nothing that I can scientifically prove.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll gladly admit that just because I believe it doesn't mean that it's absolutely the truth. I also think that in these kinds of crises, political careers are made and broken depending on how they're addressed. Do you know that Herbert Hoover made his political currency out of a flood in New Orleans? It wasn't a hurricane. It was a water deluge in the middle of America, and the Mississippi grew out so big that it flooded all of New Orleans. And Herbert Hoover was sent down there to straighten out the mess. He made a lot of money doing that and became president of the United States doing that, because there's always a seam between what actually happens and what the media reports happening. If you control the media, you come out looking, smelling like a rose. If you don't control the media, you look like whoever it was that was W's FEMA director. You're sure doing a good job there, Scotty, or whatever it is.
Brownie.
Brownie is doing a real good job, Brownie. And that blew up in Brownie's face. Natural disasters will happen. But just as natural as the disaster is the corruption by the government. Too much money is moving across the table, and too many hands are out to get their part. That happens in hurricanes and national disasters. It also happens in war. And when the war with Iraq came, apparently Vice President Cheney was in exactly the right position, and he made the most money. I don't think there's a lot of debate about that.
No, there isn't. There's all sorts of examples where ordinary soldiers have talked about pallets of money coming, currency coming on pallets, stacks and stacks of $100 bills all wrapped in saran wrap and so forth, and just disappearing. Disappearing. Talking about untold amounts of money, untold amounts of money. You know.
That is converting public money into private hands any way you can.
And there's no, and I think now it's reached a mind-boggling stage, though. I think now it's just a torrent of corruption.
How do we prevent Doug becoming calloused in the light of all of that? I mean, if we are to be watchdogs of our own society and our own economy, and certainly our public weal, we're going to have to believe that doing something will actually work. But it's becoming increasingly difficult to believe that doing something will work when nothing we are doing seems to stop any of it now.
Well, you have the Trump administration where Trump is leaving many of the offices unfilled.
Yeah.
In the State Department, most of the offices are unfilled. You go through the cabinet; they're unfilled. So where there would be people in there who might be career people who have a background who've been nominated to those positions, they're not there, and nobody's following what's happening. What's happening just in the State Department is almost a scandal. What's happening in the State Department? All these people with fantastic careers, 30 or 40 years. People who speak a dozen languages and all sorts of talented people have been forced out. And now you just have a Secretary of State, basically, who was given the award of friendship by Putin, you know, and
it was talking about what's going on in Iran like he wanted to go over there and make an oil deal. Yeah, learn to do business with ExxonMobil and we can work out something here in Iran.
Yeah. That's really the unknown factor, I think, in the Trump scandal, is that at a certain point Putin may decide that he no longer has any use for this man, Mr. Trump. It's time to pull the plug on him, which is in that dossier by that British.
Yeah, and it's floating around out there.
And he'll just release what he has on the guy, and suddenly it'll be all over. Yeah,
but if Trump sells his followers to eat crap sandwiches, they will go to the kitchen and spread it on the best bread they got.
Yeah. Well, even Nixon at the end there had 25% of the population that was still standing with him even after Watergate, amazingly, you know. And so Trump, there's these people that, I don't know how to describe it. They're just immune to what the truth is, immune to facts.
No, I think theoretically democracy is what democracy is. It has its flaws. But I'll take it over all of the other available forms because at least with democracy, I have hope of other freedoms and the use of individual powers in other ways. If you cut my tongue or my throat so that I couldn't look in this camera and tell those people out there, I believe in what I'm doing. I believe that it is important to bring you the voice of Douglas Caddy because what his eyes have seen and where he has been. And I'm able to do that here at Houston Media Source because we are the one media outlet that you personally can participate in if you come down here and do the work. Glad to have you out there. And I'm also glad to have you, Doug. Where do we go from here? What's our next program going to be about?
Well, there's so much brewing out there, I'm sure we won't have any trouble finding an interesting topic to discuss next time. And you talked about democracy and the value of democracy. Our discussion could not take place in the Soviet Union, in Russia. Our discussion could not take place in China. Very few countries.
Couldn't take place in Venezuela either now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we still in the United States have freedom of expression. And what is happening right here with this Channel 17, with this station right here, is an example. We still have freedom of speech and freedom of discussion.
And we got a vehicle to make it happen.
That's right.
England, with all of the glory of English common law on which our very constitutional law is based, does not have a First Amendment. The state can come in and say, no, not this time. Shut them up. That has not yet happened here. I see threats in the media, but so far, we've been able to hold that together. And then there's the Second Amendment, just as important as the first, I'm sure, and to a lot of people more important. But if you read it, it's safe. But I have always surrendered my rights to the Third Amendment. You can send all the soldiers to my house you want to put up to bed there. Douglas Caley, I'm glad that you are my friend. And I think we can get together and talk about some interesting things.
And I value your friendship, Ray, very much, and I admire what you've done over the years. I'm writing my autobiography, and I have a chapter about you in my autobiography.
Oh my gosh.
Because you have changed history. You have changed world history. People may not be fully aware of that, but I'm going to prove it in my book that you have changed world history. And I thank you for doing that.
I'm very kind. I want to thank our producer, Mark Pirtle. He can make magic happen, even makes me look pretty good, and that's an amazing feat of magic. I don't know when I'll be back, but I can assure you that I will be back, and I can assure you that I'll bring my friend Doug Caddy to talk to you. Welcome to Public Affairs, Public Access on Houston Media Source. Get in touch with us and get involved, and thank you and goodbye for this show.